Okay, welcome everyone to this Explorers special webinar fireside chat with Professor Ari Friedlaender. We're really fortunate to have him here and have a bit of his time today to talk with myself and our chief scientist, Dr. Verena Meraldi. Before we get going, just a quick note that we do have a question and answer box located at the bottom of the screen, which you can drop in any questions and we will try and answer them with Ari at the end. The aim is that we'll talk for about 35 minutes and then take your questions and we'll learn more about the incredible work that Ari is doing. When we talk to Ari, we're always very humbled because when we look at his CV, it's kind of really scary. It's got everything in there from, and I've got to have it in front of me because it's so vast, Ari. As well as being the ecologist and professor at the Institute for Marine Sciences at the University College Santa Cruz, associate researcher, National Geographic supporter, World Wildlife Fund, US delegate to International Whaling Commission, scientific community for Antarctic research, advisor on cetaceans. The list goes on and on. So you are very much Professor Whale in a very good way, and thrilled that we at HX are able to work with you and share your work. Very much so. I'm Tudor Morgan. I'm the HX ambassador and work with the team and have been working for HX for a number of years. And Verena's our chief scientist and been again with us for a very long time and works very closely with Ari. So to get us going, Ari, we're very fortunate to have you on board. What does your work entail?
Well, thanks, Tudor and Verena and everybody at HX. First off, this is I feel like we've turned a corner from being sort of a guest scientist to just being complete partners and colleagues on all of this together. And I really do feel like part of this family. And what our work entails effectively is trying to understand whales in the Antarctic, trying to understand their lives, their behavior, and how the things that impact them from climate change, from human activity, how these things manifest, and what are the threats to these animals, and how do we mitigate those threats? And then how do we take that information and share it as broadly as we can with as wide an audience as we possibly can?
And in terms of that, and I know Verena, you're a specialist in science communication and how we work with our guests. How does that fit with our teams and Ari's teams? How do we get these world-leading scientists on our ships and doing their work as well as sharing with our guests?
Well, it's the perfect combination, if you ask me. I mean, we are going to these very remote, difficult to access areas over and over again to show the beauty of these places to our guests. So why not combine that with supporting research, supporting, giving logistical support to different research groups that probably don't have a place on a research vessel or the economic means, because it's also super expensive to get to these areas. So we are very fortunate to be, again, going over and over to these same regions, and we can offer our ships as platforms of opportunity. And then these amazing researchers like Ari himself can come, join, do the research, share that with our teams. Our experts can also learn so much from being next or witnessing what Ari and his team are doing as work. They will have the last minute news about how whales are doing in these environments directly from the researchers on board, and all of our guests will also benefit from witnessing this firsthand. So for me, it is a win-win situation and always will be.
And Ari, we first met, I think we probably don't want to admit now how long ago, but we first met when you were on a special charter vessel that had come down from Monterey to do some research, and I think you were tagging minke whales at the time with all very cutting edge technology, but it moved so fast. how can you talk us through how your research has changed over the years? And I mean, specific, you work all over the world, but specifically in Antarctica.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Tudor. And when my history in the Antarctic goes back at this point actually over 25 years. I started working in the late 1990s with the Australian Antarctic Division, and at that time, all we had the capacity to do was count whales from these kinds of platforms. And then eventually, as we gained a little bit more momentum in our science, we started doing things like collecting samples from the whales. And then concurrent with timing, there was more technology for things like tags and drones to be able to allow us even more insight into the behavior and the lives of these animals. And so we've sort of followed this trajectory of novel and new technology becoming part of what we do with our research. But one of the main things, and you mentioned this with that trip that we first met on, it was kind of this one-off trip where we got a couple weeks of ship time to try and, horrible pun here, but like kind of break the ice on how we study minke whales in the Antarctic. And the major step change that's happened with us in HX is that instead of going down for one trip in a year and getting an opportunity to go down one time, we now have this opportunity to work throughout the season to see how things change in a whale's life during an Antarctic season, but more importantly, from year to year. And as long-lived animals that are impacted by things that happen differently from year to year, being able to come back to these same places and do the same kinds of measurements and compare, hey, in a good ice year, this is what the whales were doing, and in a bad ice year, this is what they were doing. It gives us so much more, not credibility, but it gives a lot more oomph to our science to be able to say that, and then to share that and show how things change over time, I think is really, really important.
And in terms of, we're already talking too much, and we've got some pretty pictures to share. But as the technology has changed, obviously, we're sharing a picture now of your team with a drone. What's going on here? And I've got some following slides, so when I think it's the right time, I'll fast forward.
Yeah, well, so there's a lot going on in here. A picture definitely sort of says 1,000 words. The first thing I want to note is that these are two of our graduate students. This is Chloe Liu and Lauren Fritz, who are both PhD students in our lab. And just the sheer fact that we can send students, graduate students, into the field to do science in this kind of a platform, to me is such an amazing opportunity for them. But what you see Chloe catching is a drone, and this drone is really critical for us because we fly this above the animals, and it allows us to take some simple measurements that have a really massive impact. Just by measuring the length of the whale, as you can see here with a camera that's facing straight down, if we know the height above the whale and the pixel size of the image, we can actually determine the length of that animal. Again, a very basic thing, but it tells us how many adults versus how many juveniles versus how many calves are in a population. And just knowing that is a really important facet to tell you if a population is growing or not. But then the other metric that we can look at on these whales, and Tudor and I joke about this quite a bit, is measuring the girth of a whale and how the thickness of a whale changes throughout the season. And it's kind of the inverse from us. We all want to be trim and be very narrow in our in our width, but for a whale, it's really important that they put on weight throughout the feeding season, because these whales are fasting for about 6 or 7 months of the year when they migrate to their breeding grounds and then come back. So we measure the body condition when they first get to the Antarctic in December and see how skinny they are. And then we can see how well they put on weight throughout the season. And that can tell us things like, what are the critical times of year when they're putting on the most weight? How healthy does an animal have to be to reproduce? Or how much did the conditions in the previous winter impact the body condition of that animal? So what these images show you here is how we draw sort of a line from the tip of the nose to the tail on the bottom left there to give us the total length of the whale. And then you can see every 5% of the body's total length, we're measuring the width there. And so right around kind of the belly, like you would on us, that's where they change their width throughout the season. So being able to look at that again within a season and then across years is a really critical measurement, in a way that we can passively look and see how this population is doing.
And the data set, Ari, how frequently do you come across the same whale and do the same studies on the same whale year after year?
Yeah, it's so the population of humpback whales that we work with around the Antarctic Peninsula, we think it's about 12 to 15,000 whales. We've collected images and samples from 3,000 whales. And I would say in a given year, we probably only see the same whale maybe 10 to 20 times, or 10 to 20 individuals do we see again. They're sort of constantly in motion and moving over a big area. So we see a huge number of animals, and there are a small number that we are able to watch sort of from year to year and get a little bit more of an idea about how they grow and how they live. But mostly what we're looking at is the population level.
Yeah, that's cool. And yeah,
and Tudor, sorry, I should say one of the great things about these images is we go out and fly the drone on a landing. We come back and we download these images and the video, and we can analyze those data right there in the science center. We can even teach folks on board how to do this kind of measurement, and do the kind of science that we need to be done in the field right there. Yeah.
And is how much, when again, not trying to say share our age, but drones are relatively a new tool. And how much has that changed you mentioned you just did the basic observations many years ago, but the data you can get from here seems incredible.
Yeah, I would say 100 years ago was the last time that we were able to measure whales in sort of situ. And honestly, that was from the whaling data, where they would catch whales, kill them, and have to measure them after the fact. And in the last, I'd say 10 or 12 years, we can now do this on living whales in a very passive way, and learn these fundamental things about their lives and about their biology, that otherwise, we had no idea. We'd go out and we'd be like, yeah, that looks like an adult. That one looks like a calf. Oh, that one looks kind of skinny. But now that we can quantify that, it really tells us so much more.
Those the early, the history of exploration and whaling, where they would put a dart inside a whale and then report from the discovery expeditions and report back. It's quite harrowing, to report back. Oh yeah, I've killed your whale. We saw it when we put this dart in it X number of years ago. Yeah, non-invasive, the way to go.
Yeah, I like to think of ourselves as kind of modern day whalers. We're using some similar tools, like we'll talk about the biopsy stuff that we use and the tags that we use. But we can learn all of this by really not impacting the whales' lives.
And we've talked a lot about humpbacks, and we see a lot of humpbacks, and their population recovery is fantastic, and it's sort of real testament to when we stop whaling and we do some things right, then it works. What's happening with other whale populations? And we have another. It's dangerous talking to you about whales. I've normally said that's a minke, but I'm a bit worried, doubting myself now.
Yeah, this image makes me smile because so this is an Antarctic minke whale, just an absolutely gorgeous little whale. I feel like the true kind of ambassador to the Antarctic, much like an Adelie penguin or a crab eater seal is endemic to the sea ice around the Antarctic. These animals, these Antarctic minke whales, are profoundly evolved for living in the sea ice, for better or worse. They're small. You can see they've got these absolutely gorgeous markings on them. Those two flares behind the blowholes around the rostrum, to me, are just the sweetest thing in the world. And like you mentioned, while humpback whales are really increasing, minke whales are probably not in this part of the Antarctic. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there is less and less sea ice in the wintertime, and then also in the summertime, which is their preferred habitat. So, for every 100 humpbacks that we see on a trip, we might see 3 to 5 minke whales. And that's real concerning for me. That's a big red flag that the conditions are changing and it's supporting one type of whale and not another. And we see this with our colleagues who are studying, like you mentioned, birds and penguins and seals as well.
What's interesting, and probably the same with Verena, but when we first met, Ari, you were studying minke whales, and that was probably 20 years ago, maybe. I don't know now. All the years merge into one. But seeing humpbacks then was fairly rare, and you'd see minkies, but of course you wouldn't see that many. But it seemed like our minkies are that's the Antarctic species you see, because it was so rare to see humpbacks. But there's just that rebound and the sort of stability, I guess, of the minke population. I was going to ask Verena, in terms of our guests, we do a lot of observations. How can our guests get involved in supporting Ari's work and whale research from observations and the work we do?
Well, as part of Ari's methodology, when you are out trying to collect biopsies and flying the drones, you also record or take photographs to try to identify the individuals that you are taking the samples from. So one way our guests can support is by getting as many photographs of the whales that we encounter throughout the trip, and by submitting these photographs to the Happy Whale platform, which, by the way, is run by one of Ari's lab members, Ted Chisman. So there is a lot of communication between Ted and Ari, and they know exactly what whales have been sampled. So that is a very, very good way to support Ari's project.
Oh, fantastic. And and I think whenever Ari and your team and our other guest scientists, to be fair, but Ari's stuff's quite sexy, the engagement from the people on board, and I don't know those listening if you've been on board with Ari. We'll find out when we do questions at the end. But it's magic. But also, one of the things that we do a lot, and you're all explorers listening to us, but is we do a lot of engagement, but also looking at phytoplankton, krill, and of course we've got this incredible image of bubble feeding, which again from our side as a commercial operator, we can't use drones except for commercial reasons. But so the images that Ari and his team get from a scientific point of view and share with us are things like that. Just the image is alive, Ari, and how one of the things I love when I'm on board and the conversations listening with guests is like, and I'm going to ask you, Ari, put you on the spot. How many krill, or what's the tonnage of krill a humpback will eat in 24 hours?
I feel like we have been able to empirically measure that in part because of what we've been able to collect with HX. It's simple math in the sense that if you know how long a whale is, we can then say how big the mouth is. And if we know how big the mouth is, we know how much water gets inside it. And from the tags that we put on that measure how many times the animals feed in a given day, we then know how much water the animals are filtering. And then on other platforms, we measure how dense the food is. And so if you multiply the density by the amount of water that they filter in a day, you can get at an estimate of how much they eat. And right now, we believe these animals probably eat between 1 and 3 tons of food a day per humpback whale during that feeding season. And remember, that's they're eating that much because they only eat for about a third or a half of the year. But it's they are voracious in terms of. They put some of the passengers to shame, that can do the repeats in the buffet line. I've seen some pretty impressive feats myself, but I think a humpback whale is still pretty amazing.
But may I ask, Ari, do you also see a difference in the way and quantity they are feeding from beginning to end of the season? Does that go down a bit? Do they relax?
Yeah, that's a great question, Verena. So what's great is that other folks who are on board that do phytoplankton work have taught us that at the beginning of the season, December and January, is when these phytoplankton blooms occur at the surface, because you have 24 hours of daylight. You have sea ice that's melted that creates this little freshwater lens that sits up near the surface. So you have all of the plant life growing at the surface of the water in December and January. That's what the krill feed on, and that's what the whales then come to feed on. So at the beginning of the season, when the whales are at their absolute worst body condition, when they're the most hungry, the food is right there at the surface for them. And we see that the whales feed almost continuously for 24 hours a day because the krill stay up at the surface when there's no darkness. Then, as the season moves on and you have more daylight and nighttime, the krill actually start to do this movement up and down in the water column, where during the day, the krill go to depth, and then at night, they come up to the surface to feed. And the whales basically follow this movement so that by the end of the season, the whales are only feeding about half the time, which is at night when the krill are up at the surface. So yes, the amount that they feed and the place in the water column that they feed changes as a result of how the behavior of their prey changes.
And I think one of the things that I've observed is definitely towards the end of the season you seem to see a lot more sleeping humpbacks.
Yeah.
The activity is a lot less. And I think it's just worth saying as operators and under the IATA umbrella, all the commercial operators agreed to have a whale slowdown to reduce whale strike or have whale strike mitigation measures. So in the main channels in Antarctica, none of the IATA ships go faster than 10 knots. So it's a bit like speed limits around schools where it's lower. Mm-hmm. So and increased watches on bridges to make sure that we limit and mitigate any risk to the wildlife, which is really important. Ari, you mentioned just moving on because we could get some rabbit holes. You mentioned before sort of similar techniques that from the early whaling, and one of the things I was going to say, well known for is the harpooning and taking it further. It's sort of Ari. He's the guy with the crossbow. So we've got some slides here to talk through that program. But tell us a bit what's going on here and the program.
Yeah. One of the most important things that we collect when we're with HX are these little biopsy samples, and this is what you see on your screen. In so long, the skin and blubber sample that we collect. For us, the most important thing that we can do is get an image of above the whale, so we know the width, we know the length, and then we collect this little biopsy sample from the animal. This is worth more than gold to us. This contains almost the same amount of information as when you go to the doctor's office and get your blood drawn and have a physical examination. So from this blubber sample, we can find the genetic identity of that individual whale. We can tell you what population it comes from. We can tell if it's a male or a female. We can then even measure the reproductive hormones. And if it's a female, we can tell if it's pregnant or not. We can also look at nutritional hormones and stress hormones, the amount of lipid or fat that is in the sample. We can look at different isotopes of nitrogen and carbon, which tell us about what the animals are feeding on. So we can get this unbelievable suite of measurements that tells us about the health of that animal, where it comes from, and put into perspective what these animals are doing. And this is something we collect about 200 or 300 samples a year. And that's a big enough sample for us to draw some really amazing conclusions about how these animals and their populations are changing over time.
And we've just got some images here of what it looks like in reality.
Yeah, so we use a crossbow. We use a crossbow because it's kind of what's been used in our industry for a long time. It's not mechanical. There's no batteries or anything, so it can withstand a lot of the conditions that we go out in. And we shoot a bolt at the whale. It's got a small yellow float on the end of it that also acts as a stopper. The tip of the biopsy dart is hollowed out, and it's about the size of like a little ballpoint pen cap. It goes into the whale about an inch. It bounces out of the whale, collects the sample, and then the arrow floats at the surface. And here you can see it just as it's penetrating into the side of a humpback whale here. It'll bounce off. We go collect the dart. and then we put that sample into a vial for more analysis. This is a technique that we have studied for decades, literally, and we know that it has very little impact on the animal. It doesn't impact their health in any way. Oftentimes, if you get a resting whale, it might startle them, but then they'll go back to their normal activity, within a minute or two. And otherwise, the whales show very little response to this kind of sampling. So we do take it very seriously, the health and the ethics behind what we do, but this is a very minimally invasive way to learn a lot about these animals.
And I think it's just worth saying that all our activities and Ari's activities are permitted by our respective governments. In Ari's project from the US government, so it's all gone through ethics committees and the scientific rigor and value of the work that's done. So it's all above board and legal. Ari, what is that orange thing on this whale?
Yeah, so just to orient yourselves, you're looking kind of down the blowhole of a humpback whale. You are off the left side, sort of off of its tail on the left side of the animal, looking towards the head. So you see the biopsy dart is in the back. And then what you see at the very top of this screen, those are the two blowholes that are closed. And then between them, that orange thing, that is one of these motion sensing and video recording suction cup tags that we place on the whales that give us a 24-hour perspective of what these animals are doing in the Antarctic. The tag that's on there is actually really, really special. It's a tag that we developed just this past year that actually measures heart rate. So for the first time, we can tell you the heart rate of a resting humpback whale or a minke whale, or we've done it in California and measured it on blue whales. And that basic measurement, telling us the heart rate of an animal, you can use that to calculate the metabolic rate, or how much energy the animals use, and then therefore how much energy the animals need. And it's a very fundamental measurement that allows us to better understand the needs of these animals and how they're going to be impacted by things like changes in the amount of krill that's available to them.
Amazing. We've got some slides now, just some up close of the blubber samples. I think maybe this one is a good one to.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Yep. So you can see on the left, that's the blubber in the skin coming out of one of those tips. We put them into these little vials that get marked with an alphanumeric code. It tells us. So in this case, MN is the species name for humpback whales, Megaptera novanglii. The year is 2022, and then an underscore, and then that 357 is the day of the year. So this would have been towards the end of December, and then A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Those are the sequence of samples that were collected on a given day. And then at the end of that NAN means collected from the Nansen. So a lot of information in there. And then on the bottom, like Verena mentioned before, the other really valuable piece of information that we can collect and that citizen science helps us out with a huge amount is an image of the underside of the flukes of a humpback whale, which are very unique to individuals and can be matched if you have an appropriate catalog or mechanism to place photographs together. And that's what Happy Whale literally is. It's a platform for citizens, for professionals, for anybody to submit photographs of whales, have a date, have a location, and we can then match that fluke to where it's been seen in the Antarctic or potentially on a breeding ground. And then that just gives us much more information on an individual animal.
Yeah, and I mean, for humpbacks, as you say, they each have a very specific pattern on the fluke, but other whales do have scars or bits missing on the dorsal fins or anything. So it works fantastic for humpbacks now, but it's also expanding to being able to identify other species of whales that do not have this very characteristic footprint, let's say, or
fingerprint,
fingerprint.
Equivalent of,
Equivalent.
We've got some, and I assume that orange tag, Ari, that you showed, got some of the video footage like this, but there's some really cool footage. I'll just play this one, and you can tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so we make this panel to make us look a lot smarter than well, certainly than I am. So what you are is you're on the back of an Antarctic minke whale right here. You can see you're in a group with other minke whales. On the top left, that actually shows you the orientation of the whale in the water. So now it's diving straight down. On the numbers that you see on the panel next to it are then graphically shown across the bottom two panels. The main ones are on that top bar moving across. The green is the speed, the blue is the depth, and the purple is what we call the jerk, or how much the animal is moving around in 3 dimensions. And what you're seeing here is some of the first and some of the only footage we have of Antarctic minke whales swimming and feeding together. So as the animal dives down, we're now at a depth of 60, 70 meters, over 200 feet deep with these animals. And they are sort of now leveling off. You're going to see these animals actually do a lunge feed in a minute here. And I can tell because when you see that speed, that green bar go up very quickly and then down, that's a feeding lunge. So the animal's accelerating very quickly. You saw its head moving up and down. And now if we kind of let it play again, just for another little bit, you might see this animal feed. But you can see 2 or 3 other animals in the foreground. There we go. The animals. You can see one little krill just passed by. It was not a lot of food there, but this kind of information and just seeing the video gives you this unprecedented view into the lives of these whales that spend 95% of their lives underwater, where we can't see what they're doing. So being able to go out on HX ships and put these tags out, share that information literally as it comes off of the whale, it just gives you such an intuitive sense for what these animals are doing when we can't see them.
I think one of the things that, this is just incredible footage, right? It's just, kind of almost brings me to tears just watching it. But that, when I'm on board with your team and you come and they, you say, oh, what happened today? And oh, let me show you this. And then they're showing it to guests and, the mix and, just that buzz of seeing this stuff live. And, this is, new to science. A lot of it, as you said, it's incredible. Right, I was just thinking, what else have we got? Have we got another? No?
No, that's the same one.
Same one? Okay.
Oh, well, this is a beautiful image looking inside the mouth of a humpback whale, and a view that you rarely get to see. So the animal you're looking at the left side. This is the upper jaw of a humpback whale, and you can see all of those baleen plates that are fixed to the top jaw. If you're looking at it from the outside in, you can see it almost looks like a comb. But if you look on sort of the animal's right side, the inside of that baleen is actually really fringed and it sort of creates this mat. And that's what the animals push the water through that has the krill in it. And then it sieves out the krill that the animals are feeding on. So usually about 300 baleen plates in the mouth of a humpback whale. And yeah, very rarely kind of observed thing to get to see in the Antarctic.
And would this be, is this right, Ari? So its lower jaw is in the water, pulling water into its mouth to filter.
Yeah, so the lower jaw, the skin underneath the lower jaw, all the way down to the umbilicus or the belly button of that whale can expand in a huge way. So a humpback whale can get about 100% of its body weight in water in one mouthful. That's how much it can extend. So if that whale weighs 40 tons, it is collecting 40 tons of water every time it opens its mouth and then pushing that water out through the baleen plates. And that's what makes them such effective and efficient predators is you get a lot of water in, you can get a lot of food in as well.
Yeah.
That's just mind-boggling. Right, we've got another video here of some feeding. I'm just going to pull it to the sort of highlight. It's a bit longer, so I'm just pulling it through. Hopefully.
Yeah, so now you're on the back of a humpback whale, and you're going to see the animals. Oftentimes, the way they're oriented when they're feeding is they're coming back up to the surface and probably counter shading or looking at the surface, and they can see how much food is above them. You can see that animal right there is just swimming through a minefield of krill. You can almost measure the density of the food there. And if we pull out still images, we even have an opportunity to tell you what species of krill that is, and sometimes even how long they are. So again, it gives us this understanding of how these animals locate the things that they need in their lives, and how they forage, and how they navigate an environment like the Antarctic, where you have things like icebergs and sea ice, and it's really dark when you go when you go deep, and how these animals figure out where food is, and how to make a living, to me is just absolutely remarkable, and something that um, sharing it with other people helps to remind us that this is amazing. And like Tudor and Verena said, when we can come back on the ship after an outing and download this video and show it to people, I'm almost more excited to watch people's response,
Yes.
to see it for the first time and just watch kind of the jaws drop in amazement, and then the smiles. People are laughing, people are happy, and yeah, just being able to show them this kind of stuff, it enhances the experience of an already unbelievable place even more.
Yeah, it's like the thing that you will not forget from such an experience. It's yeah, a once in a lifetime thing that you get to experience this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so great. Ari, how many of your we're gonna I'm conscious of answering some questions, but how many you're with us? You have team on board. You occasionally come and join them, and you have your own laboratory at University of Santa Cruz. How many researchers do you have in your group doing all this incredible work?
Well, to be honest, we have so much opportunity with HX that I almost have to import some hired hands to fill up all of the opportunity. Um, it also makes me really popular with folks because I can say, hey, I've got an opportunity to go to the Antarctic for a bit of time to do this amazing work on this amazing ship with these unbelievable partners. And people think I'm this amazing and benevolent, person giving out opportunity all the
You
time.
are,
But
to be fair,
but I'm a vehicle through HX for that. In my lab, I've generally got about 4 or 5 graduate students, 2 or 3 postdocs who are people that have finished their PhD but are continuing to do research before they get a professorship. And then we have typically the same number of people that we hire each season as technicians, to help support the research. So there's about 10 or 12 folks, that we rotate through on the HX platforms each year.
No, fantastic. We're back on that one. I'm just going to go through some bits about the session and what next, and then we'll go into questions. But if you're interested in some of our destinations, then we have done a number of webinars, which you may be familiar with as HX Explorers. But this QR code will take you to the link of the library of webinars and fire chat sessions to give you a more in-depth. So if you're interested in learning more, then please go here. And then also, if you're interested in joining some of Ari's team, then all next season, Antarctic season, Ari's team members will be on board Amundsen and be sharing this incredible work firsthand. So please, if you are interested, then go for it. Don't miss this opportunity to be very much part of this research and learning firsthand. And then also remember, as you are all HX explorers, there is the opportunity to win big, not win big, but to take advantage of the current Explorers sale, which finishes at the end of June. So there are those opportunities, and of course you're all here as part of our webinar, so you do have the contact details, but any questions, of course, please contact your sales agents, and they'll be happy to help. And Ari, we're going to go to questions, but I love this picture. It's like just a little bit of fishing. Look what I've caught.
That's right. Yeah. That's not the Antarctic, but
No.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Which actually, I'm just going to stop sharing screen so we go to we just focus on us and the questions. But that's a really good segue, actually, because we've had a few questions and I've just been filtering them through. how does your work in the Antarctic compare with work, and the question was actually specifically about Svalbard, but compared with the Arctic, what's going on in the Arctic?
Yeah, really good question. And we get asked this kind of question a lot. Mostly it's, do you work in both places? And to be honest, there are so many amazing people that work in the Arctic. It's logistically slightly easier because there are countries that are adjacent to the Arctic that do amazing work there. But to me, having a comparative environment to be able to study how things like human activity, subsistence harvest, um, tourism, climate change, how all of these things impact animals. It's great to be able to describe it in one place, but if you can then compare it to a second place, it gives you this second level of understanding about what is actually the most important factors or variables that are impacting these animals. And so we are learning a ton from our colleagues in the Arctic about how the similarities and differences and how different species or environments are impacting marine mammals.
No, brilliant. And then this is one maybe for Verena. Tim has asked, he'll be going to Antarctica in December and he likes to take photos. Is there any part of the whale that will help with the research?
Well, if it is a humpback whale, the most important part will be trying to get a picture of the fluke when it's diving. Normally, correct me if I'm wrong, Ari, but whales or humpbacks will remain in the surface for a little while while breathing and doing shallow dives where you will not be able to see the fluke. But when they deep dive, you will have the opportunity there to see the fluke. And it's very characteristic because it really, you see that it's going to, the dive is different. It's going to be, yeah, it's different. You can see it with experience. But yeah, just trying to get that fluke from the humpback whales. From other species, like mentioned, they may have scars or bits that are missing on the dorsal fins or stuff like that. For orca, that is the case. They also may have a very specific shape, being the long, tall one from a male orca could be a little bit bent, or yeah. So just things that you see are different. Also, the amount of barnacles that are on the faces of some of the animals. So all these little things that can differentiate one whale from the other will be super helpful. And all of those can go to happywhale.com.
And I'd add to that when you're on these trips, you have sort of two different opportunities to do that. One is as you're transiting from place to place. If you're outside on one of the expedition decks, or anytime we pass whales, you can collect these great photos from the main ship if you get a nice big lens. And then when you're out in the water, like Verena said, you get enough of an opportunity to sit in the water with these animals and take time to watch them behave, and you'll get sort of a sense of their rhythm. And when, okay, it takes 3 breaths and then it's going to, lift its fluke. So the next time it comes up, the boat can position itself and you can have that opportunity. So yeah, you get a couple of different ways to experience the animals.
No, fantastic. I'm going to ask, there's two sort of questions which I'm going to link together. Sharon asks, what is realistic to expect in terms of frequency and distance of seeing whales when you're on the ships? And then also Sally asks, what are the best months for whale activity?
So I would say at the beginning of the season, the animals start to arrive December, January. They're very surface active when they arrive, but they're probably going to be less dense. And then by March, like Tudor mentioned, the animals will do a lot of resting at the surface and there'll be more of them. So to me, like the sweet spot is kind of February, when you've got a lot of whales that are pretty active. I love going to me, honestly, the end of the season to me is my favorite time to be there, because you get just beautiful lights, with sunrises and sunsets, and with the amount of whales around, February, March to me is my favorite time to be there, just from a volume of whales.
But that has also changed a bit over time, right? I mean, you start seeing more and more whales arriving a bit earlier. Around end of November, you already start seeing some humpbacks in the area. I remember the first time I went to Antarctica in 2007, it was like seeing a whale was like the highlight of the trip.
It was like
Yeah.
seeing a polar bear in the Arctic. It was like everyone out there.
Exactly.
And now it's like,
Exactly.
yeah,
And now they are a lot more present,
yeah,
so
yeah.
signaling
Yes, like
about
you said, yeah, their abundance has increased dramatically in the last 20 years. So yeah, you're definitely going to see more than you had in the past. Yep.
And Ari, Julie asks, can you say something more about the minke whales and why their habitat has changed so much over the years? Is it climate change or a host of factors?
Yeah, so around the Antarctic, minke whale populations are very robust, literally hundreds of thousands of them. But on the western side of the Antarctic Peninsula, it's an area that has warmed much more rapidly than any other part of the continent and almost warmed more than almost any other place in the world. One of the results is that in the wintertime, you don't have the sea ice developing in that area. And these animals really live in the sea ice. That's what they're evolved for and adapted to be able to take advantage of. So in the wintertime, if you don't have sea ice, those minke whales are likely going to other places where there is ice. And then they're going to be in a different place when that ice melts during the summertime, and they're likely to stay there. So in terms of just the available habitat for minke whales, it seems like there's less and less of that over the last 50 years that scientists have been able to record via satellite the amount of sea ice that's available. But at the same time, humpback whales have increased because humpback whales typically don't engage with sea ice. They're more of an open water species. So what you see is an ecosystem that is sort of subpolar. Gentoo penguins, fur seals, humpback whales are all krill-eating species that typically live at slightly lower latitudes, like in Alaska, for example, rather than being in the high Arctic. But those three species are becoming much more abundant around the Antarctic Peninsula, and the species like crab-eater seals, Adelie penguins, and minke whales are less and less common and are starting to are observed much more in the polar regions rather than this sort of warming area around the peninsula.
I'm going to ask two. I'm conscious of time and everybody's time listening into us, and also your time, Ari. I've got two more questions, and I'll ask them at the same time. But Lawrence asks, how do the tags get on the whales? But I guess we could also answer how they get off. And then a really good high-level question to finish us off. What is the high-level findings about the status of various species of whales in the Antarctic? That's a big question.
Yeah, I love both of those questions. Putting a tag on the whale, I will say, is probably the most exciting thing I get to do as part of our job. Like you saw in that last image, we have a long carbon fiber pole. It's a bit longer than the one you saw in that image. It's about 6 meters long. At the end of it, it has a little friction cup that the tag sits in the cradle of. The tags have suction cups, and we literally very slowly approach the animal from sort of from an angle, and then it's literally slapping the tag on the whale's back. If it gives us an opportunity, the tag will stay on sort of with natural suction for about 24 hours, and then it falls off, floats to the surface, has a little transmitter that tells us where it is. We go and we pick up the tag and download the data. The high level question I think that is the most critical for us that we've been able to measure is how the pregnancy rates in humpback whales is related to the amount of sea ice. So one of my graduate students a number of years ago created this pregnancy test for humpback whales. Like I mentioned, with that biopsy sample, we can now look at the amount of progesterone, the same reproductive hormones that women have when they're pregnant. We can look at that same level in humpback whales and tell if a whale is pregnant or not. By linking the pregnancy rate in the population to the previous winter's sea ice, we found that when you have a lot of sea ice, you end up with a lot of pregnant whales the following year. When you have low sea ice, you have fewer pregnant whales the following year. And the reason for that is because the winter sea ice provides a habitat and a feeding opportunity for young krill, the first year krill. So when you have a lot of sea ice, krill can get a lot of food over the winter, and you have a lot more growth of krill. In a bad sea ice year, you have fewer krill that actually make it through the winter time. And so what this has raised to us is that krill are actually a limiting resource in the Antarctic. We thought when I started my career, people thought that krill was so abundant that it would never be something that was ever limited. And because in commercial whaling, we killed 2 million whales in the 20th century, there was this massive surplus of krill in the environment. But we can now show that because of how rapidly climate change is affecting this area, the amount of krill that is actually in this environment is limiting for whales. And that's a huge red flag because, yes, humpback whales are doing really, really well, but things like blue whales and fin whales that were just as abundant as humpback whales in the past, they have not recovered. And if the krill is limiting for humpback whales, it's going to be limiting for these other animals as well. And that to me is a huge concern. And it means we should really be thinking about the ways that we can mitigate or minimize that kind of effect on the animals. And there's two ways to deal with that. One is to figure out how we stop climate change. And that is something that a ton of people around the world, it's a global issue. The other is something that is much more narrow to the Antarctic, and that is commercial krill fishing. And we can do something about both of those, but in the Antarctic specifically, we need to do something about krill fishing and make sure that that industry does not take away the food from the animals that require it and that are limited by it. And so without that information over a long period of time, from a long-term partnership with HX to be able to collect those data, we wouldn't be able to say those things and be able to go to the table with conservation and management and say, we now have this information and we need to be able to act on it.
And other studies that we have been supporting have also been showing lately that whales and krill fisheries are overlapping in time.
Yep.
Obviously competing for the same resources. So it's a lot of things that we can get from those support from those research projects.
Yeah, and frankly, you don't hear about this kind of stuff unless you're in the field at the front lines, experiencing it, and then being able to do something about it. I feel like the experience that you get on these ships, especially on HX, when you're down there in the environment, living it, it just breeds this passion and this desire for doing more. And that's what I love about the folks that come off of these trips is that they're informed, they're educated, they're motivated, they are excited and
yes.
Champions, exactly. Yeah. And I just love that. Yeah.
Ari, Verena, thank you so much. I think we could have another webinar on climate change issues, impact of fishery. It's a whole new another subject, but the impacts of climate change are massive on populations, particularly as you mentioned there on the minkies. But thank you so much for your time and sharing that. And we very much look forward to having your teams on board next season and for many seasons to come. Thank you so much, Verena, for looking after this whole program for us and your insights as well. Thank you very much, all our explorers, for listening in. We will, when we finish the webinar now, we will be having a short survey. If you wouldn't mind just responding to that, and we can look at making improvements and following up on these exclusive Explorer chats going forwards. But thank you very much. Amazing, Ari. Keep up the incredible work.
Well, thank you guys for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Love seeing you all.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.